Hello everyone and welcome to this free It's Learning webinar on individual learning plans. I'm Anandan, the product marketing manager at It's Learning. Today we'll be hearing from Freydis Hamra, who helped develop this tool, and John Arthur Berg, our data security officer, on preventing data breaches. We all know that constructive feedback is crucial to improving a student's all-round performance and helping them thrive at school. Teachers have told us that our individual learning plans is a great way to give feedback and encourage student engagement and, for younger students, parental engagement. But they wanted it to do more. So we built our new ILP in collaboration with teachers to improve workflow and support their needs to complement established feedback processes in schools. It's a massive improvement from the previous version, and we are glad you could join us today to learn more about this powerful tool. Before I hand this over to Freydis, some quick housekeeping items. There'll be a question and answer session at the end, so please submit any questions you may have in the question panel throughout this webinar, and we will try to get through as many as possible in the time that we have. You will also receive a recording of the webinar, which will include a video of how best to use the new ILP tool. And now it's over to Freydis.
Thanks, Anu. So before I go into the details of the new tool, I wanted to tell you a bit about the background for why we did this change and how we've been thinking along the way. So we've had a tool for individual learning plans in It's Learning for many, many years. It was built by Norwegians and tailored, we hoped, to the process that was used in Norwegian schools. And as the schools have developed their process, we have realized that this is not actually working very, very well. And we also got a lot of feedback from our customers along the way. So what I did a year ago was to look into a lot of the feedback that we had and also some customer requirements that we had received, and try to build a new tool that would fit the modern processes even better. And even though it's been tailored to the Scandinavian market, we've made it our goal to make it flexible enough to be used also in other markets and multiple education segments. So what have we done? The new tool consists of three main parts, and each of them have taken into account a lot of the feedback that we've gotten over the years. One of the things that has been requested is the option to set up templates for the individual learning plans so that you have a more consistent use within a school or within a district or within a whole institution. We tried to do that in the old tool, letting mentors share their plans as templates, which was a good idea, but it didn't actually work very well, it turned out. So what we've done now is that we are allowing administrators to create templates. Administrators either on the site level, which is the district or the institution or whatever, or on school organization level. And as such, the templates can exist on both those levels. So you can have a template that's only available for a certain school, or you can have it available for all the schools in the site. And as a mentor, you can create plans based on templates that are available for your site and your school. Next is the core of the whole tool, which is the individual learning plans. And this is the replacement of the old tool. So this is built to support the conversation that happens between a mentor, his students, and possibly also parents, depending on the school level. So it's a tool made for the overall status of the student, also outside coursework, because we have tools to assess and evaluate student work and student status within a course. So this handles the whole part of being in school that's outside the course. And lastly, we've added bits that we've called a midterm review. This is a formative assessment. It can be done with or without the use of grades. And it enables course teachers to give their input directly into this mentor-student and possibly parent conversation that was mentioned in the individual learning plan core. And that's been also one of the feedbacks that we've gotten most, that course teachers didn't actually have access to the ILP to write their feedback or their input. So we've separated it. And even though we also gave course teachers access to write in plans, this midterm review gives the course teachers a more direct way of giving their course-related feedback into the ILP. So this is built also to be mobile friendly. The content adjusts to any screen size, and all functionality should be available independent of the platform. It's not yet available in our mobile app. We'll consider that as we move forward. So let's go back to the three main parts again. For the administrator, you get a template overview. So this gives you a list of all the templates available on your site if you're a system administrator, or in your organization if you're an administrator on a lower level. And as a site administrator, system administrator, you have access to all the plans for all your organizations. We also provide a localized default template in some markets, not every market, that is written it's not only a translation of the default in English, but it's a market fitted template that suits each market better. So this is available in most of the major languages, but not all. You can see here there's also a way to activate or deactivate templates. You could interpret that as publishing as well. And only published or active templates are available to mentors when they create plans. That way you can unpublish something and make corrections, or you can pull them out if they're no longer used. So when you create a new template, what you do is you can add a number of text fields. They're plain text, and each field should have a title. And for each field, you can set which roles can see the content and which roles can edit the content. And as you can see, the teacher is also now a role in this, which was lacking in our previous tool. And remember also to give each template a simple and clear name, so it's obvious. If you want to have several templates available, it's obvious which one the mentors should use for their students. So for the mentors, we have an overview that gives them, first of all, the list of all the current plans, so any plans with where today's date is included. It's very easy to toggle the visibility for students and parents if you use that. And another of the features that we've improved on is that as a mentor, you can now create a plan for not only one student at a time, but multiple students or the whole group if you want to. You have a checklist here that you just check off any students that you want to include. So when you create a new plan, oh, sorry. I didn't get a screenshot of that. Let me do that live afterwards. So if you see in the screenshot, you've got current plans, and then you have archived plans. So any plans where the end date is passed, we move automatically there, so you don't have to do it manually, or you can do it manually if you want to. I'll get back to the midterm reviews for mentors, because I want to explain that for the course teachers first. So for a course teacher, in status and follow-up, you have an item for individual learning plans, just like before. And in here, you can create your midterm reviews. So even though you can see these as assessments, they are not a visual part of the assessment record, and they're not a visual element in the course where students are being assessed. They live here in context with the individual learning plans. And a midterm review can be edited, and it can be deleted if you need to clean up. You can also have more than one midterm review in one course, so we are able to support both having several subjects in one itslearning course, or having one itslearning course for each subject. That doesn't matter what you do, both are supported here. So when you create a new midterm review for the course, all the course students are included in that. You give it a title. It's very common to then include either the name of the term or the time period where it belongs. You can choose an assessment scale. And as one of the options here, you also find no grading, which means you can do this without giving any grades. You can set the visibility, which is default off. So you can make your assessments before you make it visible for students if you want to. And you can also enable self-assessment, giving the students an option to give their own feedback for each course. And for the students, this is available in their ILP. So everything is in one place. They don't have to click in and out of several courses. And students cannot see this in courses, only in their ILP. So it's very clean and easy to use, especially for students. We have also built this so these midterm reviews are not connected to terms, for better or worse. We've seen there are some very good sides to connecting things to terms, and there are a few downsides to it. So we've tried to make this independent, so you can use it no matter how you choose to time your courses. So when I've created this as a teacher, I'm taken to the interface where I can write my assessment, be it comments and/or grades. And as you can see, this is a familiar interface. It's the same that's being used for the task tool and the same that's being used for manual columns in the assessment record. And as a teacher, I can also see the self-assessment from my students, even though they don't do it in this interface. We feed it back in here. So back to the mentor view. So the last tab for the mentors is the midterm reviews. And if all the teachers use the same assessment scale, this page will give you a nice overview of your student status. And it's easy to identify any students that you need to follow up especially. There are some limitations here. We can show this graphic view only if the teachers have used scales with 2, 3, or 6 levels in them. And we show the assessments that have been given during the last 4 months. That might seem like an odd number, but it's to make sure that it's shown for each term, which is the most common use, but also not overlapping with assessments given the previous term. There's a small selector here to switch between different assessment scales if your teachers have not used the same scale. So going into what we've called the detailed ILP view, the page you see here is actually a parent looking at the ILP for her child. But the same view is also shown to mentors, to course teachers, and to students. It's a total overview. It collects all the midterm reviews. It collects all the ILP plans, and it's all seen on the same page. It's really easy to go back in time if you want to check what you discussed in the previous meeting or the previous term or the previous year. And you can easily select a time frame for when you want to see midterm reviews. So that's also the selector on the top here. As a mentor, I can switch between students easily. I'll show you that afterwards. Every section here can be collapsed, so it's easy to read. The whole page is, of course, as previously also mentioned, mobile friendly. You can read it on a small screen. And if you look at the bottom here, there is also a section for older plans. And for now, that gives you a link to the old ILP tools if there are any current plans, any plans there. So that takes you directly into the old tool and gives you an overview of all the plans available there. And we'll keep that at least for 2 or 3 years, as long as there are plans available. So that way we'll keep track for those that now switch to the new tool and have used the old one. We'll make sure you can have access to all your old information. And also note on transitioning from the old ILP tool to the new one, it's not actually possible to take the data that exists in the old tool and put it into the new tool because the format is vastly different. So this is why we have the link that I described at the bottom of the page, allowing you to go into the old tool to find information there. And if you have previous plans from another system like Fronter maybe, if you've exported those as files, you can import those after our next release. So there will be a way to upload those as attachments, so you can again make sure that any previous comments and notes from previous meetings can be accessed. I'm now logging in as a mentor, and I find ILPs from the mentor menu, just like before. Didn't move. And going into a student, I can now see the overview for this student. I can easily switch to another student if I want to. So this student didn't have any midterm reviews in that or any plan like that. I can select here either a custom period of dates or viewing midterm reviews in the time frame of any of the plans available. Again, I can publish or unpublish this, so that means that it's visible for students and parents if you use that. And I have access to older plans if I need that. So that's just going directly into the old list of plans, and it's opening in a new tab, so you can easily switch between those if you want to take a look at the old plan while you're working on your new plan. So that's very easy to do, giving you a good overview of the content. So going back to the list, I wanted to show you, I can just click here to mark the whole group, create a new plan. Give that a sensible title. I already have spring used, so I'll use summer for now. And select any templates. So these are the templates available for me, one on site level and one on each of the schools where I'm a mentor. I can set a start date, that's compulsory, and I can also choose to set an end date. And this then affects when the plan is archived. So start date is now set to today. If I set the end date to tomorrow, this plan will move from current plans into archived plans tomorrow. So this archived plans gives me a list of all the plans that have an end date in the past. And if there's a mistake or I want to change this, I can easily move it back to current plans, in which case the end date will be removed. And I can also manually move to archive if I want that, if I didn't set an end date or I want to archive it before the end date is passed. The last thing that was missing from our old tool was a way to export plans. So what we've done now is we've made it possible to print them. And with print, you also get access to saving this as PDFs. That's the standard functionality in any web browser. So clicking print, it opens the web browser print, and I have save as PDF as an alternative here. So that way I can export any plans I need to a file if I need to. Discussing this with a few of my colleagues, they asked me whether this depended on the mentor functionality, and it does. If you don't use mentors in the itslearning setup, this will really not work very well, because mentors are the ones creating plans and the kind of key to the whole functionality. So you need to have that, and you need to have mentor. You don't need mentor groups necessarily, but you need mentors with students assigned to them. And what we hope is that this is now flexible enough to be used in a variety of scenarios. I have been in contact with one customer who wanted to use this for their weekly conversations between a mentor and a student. So they will create one plan every week. And I've been in contact with other customers who want to use this. They just want one plan that they update several times throughout the whole year. And our tool should nicely support both of those, depending on how you want to work with it. You can use the plans without the midterm reviews, and you can use the midterm reviews without the plans. So they don't actually depend on each other. Although you still need to go into this detailed page to see all the information collected in one place. I can log out and show you the student view. So as a student, I can find this from my personal menu. And this is where I also can see the self-assessment part. So for all the courses where my teachers have allowed me to do self-assessment, I can add that, easily add some text here. If I made a mistake, I can also edit it later on. And what I write here is available for my teacher when they write their assessment, if they do it that way around. Right, I think that was what I had to say about the tool. So I'll let Jonathan tell you a bit about the security of stuff.
Okay, so this is Jonathan Berg speaking to you. I'm the Data Protection Officer at itslearning. My job is to make sure the student data, its learning processes and new processes are kept safe. And so I thought that when we were presenting individual learning plans, it would be a good time to bring up the topic of data protection impact assessments. A data protection impact assessment is kind of like a risk assessment that focuses not on the organization, but it focuses on the actual user data that's part of GDPR. So it's actually law in most of the countries, at least, itslearning operate in here in Europe. A data protection impact assessment is something one does to ensure appropriate safety and privacy of personal data. It's something one used to manage risks and find mitigating activities to decrease risks. And it's something one do to document compliance. And as I mentioned, it's actually an important part of GDPR. A DPIA, data protection impact assessment, isn't always required, but it is required as it's very broadly defined in the law. If a new processing activity, meaning a new way of working with personal data, maybe with some new technology, if it's likely to result in a higher risk, the rights and freedoms of natural persons. So that seems that's a very principled sentence. It needs to be interpreted, it needs to be unpacked. And a good example is from the Norwegian Data Protection Authorities list, which I believe is applicable, obviously, because it's the same law for all of our European markets. And the example they say when you need to do an impact assessment, if it's processing of personal data to evaluate learning, mastery, or well-being in schools, or even in nurseries. And they say it includes all levels of education, from primary and secondary education to higher education. So what the Data Protection Authority is saying is that if you engage in a new processing where you evaluate learning, mastery, well-being, you need to do a DPIA. So how do you do DPIAs, you might ask then. And a DPIA is something one do before processing starts, preferably. And one of the most important things to do is to describe the processing first. Write a description of how student data is used, what technology is used, who's going to use it. and then go and get input. You probably, in your organization, if you're a public school or a district, region, whatever, you have a DPO. So you can go to the DPO and ask for help, for input to the plan, or to the DPIA. Another thing you should do often is to ask the users whose data is processed. If you have, of course, younger kids, that would be to ask parents or parent representatives of input on the risk assessment. And then you need to assess risks. You need to identify what kind of risks this could involve, and you need to manage them. So finding mitigating actions to do this. Then it should be documented for later review, and of course it should be approved by management. This sounds awfully complicated maybe, but this is in most municipalities, in most institutions, this is kind of not an unusual task for the DPO, for instance, to be involved in. So this should be known to someone within your organization on how to kind of proceed. And let's take the example of the individual learning plans. If you come to the conclusion you need to, if you need to do DPIA to use this new individual learning plans tool, there's a few things you should assess. And the first one is fairly simple. You know, is the processing legal or is it illegal? What does that mean? So for processing to be legal, you know, it needs to have a valid purpose, a purpose that suits you. Creating individual learning plans seems like a pretty legitimate purpose for an educational institution. But you also have to think about the data you process. Is the data you process legal to process? And for instance, one of the things I'm probably going to mention several times is the use of what's called special categories of data, like health information. That kind of data isn't necessarily legal to process in an educational context. That's actually legal to process in an educational context. So a second thing to consider is if the processing is transparent. For the processing to be legal, it needs to be transparent, and means that students or parents need to understand what's happening. You know, what is this processing? What's happening with individual learning plans? Who can access it? How is it secured? What kind of data is it that's created in the process? And this is typically documented in a, you know, some kind of information that's available to the end users or their parents. Another thing that needs to be assessed is if data is stored for an appropriate amount of time. You know, some data we need to store for a long time. Some assessment data needs to be stored for 10+ years when it comes to some type of data, but other type of data shouldn't be stored for very long. It should be kind of have a short lifespan, and you have to make sure that that's appropriate. The data retention is appropriate. And you have to make sure that you don't collect too much data. Like one of the things I mentioned was special categories of data. You want to make sure you don't collect that type of data. And there's been some recent verdicts by the supervising authorities, particularly in Scandinavia, where this has been a major issue, right? There's been data collected that shouldn't have been collected. And then another important thing is, you know, this is a complicated process around individual learning plans. We have mentors, we have students, we have course teachers, you know, and you have to assess, you know, is there a risk that this data comes into the wrong hands of the wrong people, and make mitigating kind of actions to make sure not the wrong person get into it. We also have to consider in general the security of this, and of course I will always mention, if I get a chance to, is that, you know, teachers who log in and use this platform, they need to have some kind of two-factor authentication in general, but specifically when you deal with individual learning plans. This is data that should have a high level of security to make sure others can't access it. So proper authentication with two-factor authentication is in general a recommendation for a learning platform, not just by me, but from the authorities. But I would say for individual learning plans, that just highlights the requirement. Lastly, training to make sure people understand this and the data is collected in the right way, created in the right way, shared in the right way. Very important to assess. And then when you assess these things, then you can say, well, here's a couple of things that aren't good enough. We need to change it. So I've spoken about this now in the context of the individual learning plan. This is not just a DPIA, is of course not just because there is an individual learning plan. I'm using it as an example of something that obviously can need a DPIA. But the same would actually go if you acquired any kind of new technology or new product that assesses students in some way. A DPIA will be required. So don't take this as a very specific requirement for this feature, but it's the principle, right, of when a DPIA should be executed. So now you're probably wondering, do I need to do a DPIA now if I'm going to use the individual learning plan? So I've created a small flow chart with my recommendations. I think the first thing you need to ask yourselves is, well, are you already using the old individual learning plan tool in itslearning? If the answer to that is no, we're not using an individual learning plan tool today, but we're planning to start using it with this new feature, then my recommendation would be, yes, do a DPIA. If you use the ILP tool today, the next question to ask would be, are you expanding the scope of the current use? Meaning, are more teachers getting involved? Are more roles getting involved? Are you rolling it out to bigger part of the organization? If the answer to that is yes, I would recommend to do DPIA. If you're not planning to expand the scope, the last question I would ask myself is, have you previously done some kind of risk assessment for this processing? If the answer to that is no, I would recommend that you do a DPIA. This will be a very good thing to have should there be some kind of data breach or anything at a later stage, and you might identify some risks that you can take action on today. But if you've already done all of this and you're not changing the way you're using ILPs, then I would say you do not need to create a DPIA.
So there's a question of how the administrator switches on the ILP. So what we'll do now, as we just had a release last weekend, and when the whole after-release process is done, we will switch. So any customer who had the old ILP tool enabled before the weekend will have the new one after the weekend, with a few exceptions. I have a list of some customers who have used the old ILP extensively and want to wait until the summer. And this summer, everyone will be switched over, and the old ILP will no longer be available as a tool to use for this. You will still have access to the old plans as I described from the link at the bottom of the page.
And the reason we're doing is to make sure there's minimal disruption to schools that are. Yeah.
So there are quite few that have actually used it, which means we could do it this way and turn it on in the middle of a school year. So they will have a chance to look into it and experiment with it, and then maybe start using it from back to school in August. There's another question about two-factor authentication for teachers using the ILP. And itslearning is not offering that to teachers at the moment. It's only available to administrators, that's correct. Most of our customers, at least a lot of them, actually use some kind of external login. In Norway, it's often Feide. We also have other SSO integrations to itslearning, and if in that case the external login provider should have a two-factor authentication option. So that's best discussed with your login provider, but itslearning unfortunately does not offer this for teachers at the moment.
So it looks like we don't have any more questions. And thank you very much, Freydis, for doing this free webinar. And we will have more such webinars throughout the year at itslearning, not just when we introduce a new feature, but also when we have some new upgrade or improvements that we want to share with you. Thank you very much for attending. And as promised, we will send you a recording of this webinar soon.